Alright, we left off building out the actual layout and functionality of the app. We can post new tweets, edit tweets, destroy tweets, all of those things. The next step, I think, is to add the user role ability. So these tweets need to connect themselves to a user account and, show that person's name, their handle, their gravatar, all those things that are tied to it specifically. And to do that, that makes it feel like a real world app. So I'm going to go ahead and start getting those things aligned and slowly moving to where this app looks more like a final working application. So I have my server running right now. We can post tweets. I'll just do one to create it. And it's going to redirect to the show page. You'll see this, one of those alerts displaying, as I mentioned in the previous video. There's some work to be done on our controller, so this stuff doesn't quite happen, because I want the actual user to just redirect to the same page once they post their tweet, just to make it kind of a more seamless process. To get going with that, we need to kind of focus on our controller a bit. I will go ahead and close my application file. We'll go back into the Tweets controller and look at what's going on here. So when I create a tweet, I don't want it to redirect to the actual tweet. In most cases, that makes sense if you're doing a blog. In our case, since our application is kind of based on that root path, I want it to go there. So instead of the actual tweet, we'll just put root path for now, since our root path is set to be tweets. So again, if I go back to here, refresh, and I'll do third tweet. Might as well keep this naming convention going. Hopefully we're just stuck here still, so great. That margin is still bugging me though, so I'm gonna deal with it. Notification is primary. I'm gonna copy this class and see if that fixes it real quick. Sorry, I feel like I misspelled something here. It's notification. Okay, so margin bottom 0. Typo. Figures. Okay, so with that done, our guard reloaded, injected that style in, and we should be all set here. Let's get the user account stuff going. In this part, I want to essentially tie the tweet to the user. So to do that, we need to first let me explain what Devise is out of the box. It's essentially already installed on your site. You just actually have to navigate to users, sign up, I think it is. And it should be already here. It doesn't look like it is though. So we actually need to update our, looks like I missed a step on setting up Devise. So I'm going to go back to the gem, Devise, gem repo, and follow the instructions one step more. I believe I forgot to add something in the routes file, but I want to make sure of what exactly that is. Oh, okay. Yeah, we need to actually generate a Devise model as well. So that part we didn't do. So to do this, our model is going to make use of a user model. That's typically what's done using Devise. You can make however many you want, but we'll start pretty small and simple. So Rails generate model for Devise. I'm gonna go make sure I'm typing this right, and then uppercase user is what we'll do. So I created a migration. It's a pretty elaborate one at that. So if you were to look at it before you run the migrate command, we could go check it out. So it's got all these columns of stuff that go into it. So it's pretty nifty. This is kind of why I recommend going this route if you're going for user base, because look how much stuff you'd have to deal with otherwise. So with that done, we can just run Rails db migrate. And it should run that, and we should have everything all good. I'll probably commit this code just for safety's sake. And let's see, layout and markup plus Devise user model. Probably should have committed before that, but that's okay. So now you have access to this whole, plethora of routes for our user roles. So we can go into sites. My stuff would load here. So if I go to sites and see in Twitter and rake routes, we should have all these Devise based routes now, because when we ran that generation of the model, it actually adds a route in our config file, config routes, which is Devise for users, since we called it user. So what that does, and what gives us the ability to do, is to go to our users sign up page if we want to sign up a new user, and that's already set to go. So we have this nasty looking form because it hasn't been doctored up yet, but you can log in, you can sign in based on the route here, request to get your password reset, all those things based on these routes that I just displayed here. So you can edit your user registration, create new one, cancel one, all those things. Pretty nifty. So what we're going to start with is, at least at this point, getting the tweet that we author to actually add itself to the user and mention. Before I do though, I do want to add a few fields to the Devise sign up process. Right now there's only a email, password, and password confirmation, so it's only giving me email. I want a name and a username as well, basically your tweet handle without the @ sign. So to add those, there's a few steps you have to do, and I'm going to start there. So let's go to our controller, Tweets controller. Let's add, first adds before action, and make the user authenticate user, except for, in our case, is going to be index and show. Because those pages don't really need to, authenticate for any reason. And we'll basically need to add this fancy registrations controller, which hooks into the Devise gem. So we'll call it registrations controller. And you don't need to run a generation for this. It's kind of simple of what needs to be done, but this is just kind of, think of it as an extension to the Devise gem that's already there. Your best bet is to kind of add this manually. You can do it however you want though. Registrations controller extends from the Devise registrations controller. And make sure you spell this right. I already didn't. Private. And we'll do a def sign up params. And what we're doing is, since Rails has strong parameters as part of its creation security kind of thing, we need to give the OK for Devise to go ahead and add these new fields we want. So I'm going to permit name, username, which we haven't generated yet. We still need to add those. Email, which is already there. Password, same with that one. And password confirmation. And same with that one. So those fields, those last three already exist. We're just making sure they're sanitized. So I'm going to copy this one. And we need it for sign or update as well. So account update. And this stuff, I'm getting this stuff from it comes from the Devise gem and like a how-to, but it's also on a blog post, which I'll share with you guys once I get it. So I'm going to keep it as is for now. This one, we need to actually add current password, I believe. Yeah, That's just a security check to make sure when you do update your account, you enter your password to update it. So that's good and grand. One big thing we still need to do to make this really work is run a migration. And that's going to be involving adding some fields to the users table. So let's go ahead and do that. Clear this out. I'll do a Rails generate migration add. So you can type this either in camel case like this, or if you want to use underscores, up to you. I want to do camel case, add fields to users, if I can spell. And you can basically tell Rails what to do in the command line, or you can just do it within your actual file. I'm going to do it within the file because it's kind of confusing otherwise for me. All right, so I ran the migration, and this is what you end up with if you didn't pass any parameters, and it just gives you this change method. We're going to add a couple columns to our users table, which exists already because of Devise. So you won't need to generate that one yourself. This first one's going to be name. And we'll do one more. That is username. It's going to be a string. They're both strings. And then we'll finally add an index to users. And username needs to be unique, because on Twitter I don't want anyone else to have the same Twitter handle in essence. So if they do, Rails, or the app in this case, would prompt you to say, hey, that's already taken, kind of thing is how that would work. So with that all set up, we can go ahead and run our actual migration, which we haven't done yet. So we can do Rails db migrate, and that should add that stuff to our database. So now we have username and name, and the username needs to be unique. So great. So now, if it's confusing you, don't worry. Those at this point can be added to a new user account once they create their account. Before it was just email, password, and password confirmation, which is what is set up here. That is also another reason I generated the views for Devise, which you saw earlier. We're going to use customized views to go ahead and add these in and add the name and the username at the same time. So that's why, another reason why I did that. So let me open up that stuff, and I'll go into the actual Devise directory, which are where all those views are created. And the main one I want to look at is registrations right now. And you'll notice it did simple forms generations for me because I had that stuff installed prior to the fact. So that's super useful. What it didn't do is add all the classes and stuff I need for Bulma to look good and great. So I probably won't make you guys watch all of that because it's literally just adding some HTML and classes and stuff to that. So I might fast forward through it, but maybe I'll still, kind of show the process. So bear with me, and here we go. All right, guys, so I'm on the registrations sign up page. So this would be registrations new in your template. I have my markup ready to go. It's using Bulma's classes, and it's kind of at a point to where it looks good. We aren't seeing our name or username in these fields, and the reason we aren't is because we actually need to add those. We did our migration before. We added our controller. That was the fancy registrations controller. That's just something you'll have to kind of make do with, since we use name and username. If you use something different, you'll want to add those parameters here. The same for your model if you call it something else. In our case, it was user. We added name and username to the user's model. So we'll actually be appending those now to our sign up form, our update form account, for the account, I should say. So let's go ahead and add those to our form here. Right now we just have the email, the password, and the password confirmation for sign up. I want the name of the user. And I'm going to remove autofocus from this one. And I also want the username of the user. So we'll just call it username here. And autofocus will remove that as well. And I believe that should be it as far as getting our form to look the way we want it. You'll notice though on our login page, we're still back to square one. So all of these views inside Devise sadly need to have those special classes. I'm going to do the login and basically the update for these, and then you'll find on the repo everything else that's updated, just because I don't need to show you all that. It's basically just doing what I just showed you, adding those classes. So look for that on GitHub. Otherwise, I'm going to fast forward for that part and we'll be right back. All right, guys, so we have our sign up form ready to roll. We have our login form ready to roll. If we forgot your password, it's good. Same thing all the way throughout. At this point, I want to make sure our users can connect to our tweets. So at this point, they're separate things, and that's not good. So to do that, we need to actually add some relations to our models. Before we go further in our controller to make all the fancy stuff happen, we need to make sure our tweets and users can relate to each other. And to do that, we need to add an ID, of course, to a model of the tweet. So let's go to our tweet model. I believe I have user open. Let's go to tweet and let's add belongs to user. So all tweets will belong to a individual user, and user will have many tweets. So put a space there just to make it easier to read. Great, so that relation's there, but we still need to generate our ID. So to do that, I'm going to do another migration, and we're going to add a user ID to our tweets model. And that allows each user to actually associate itself to a tweet. So let's do a get, or not get, sorry, Rails, generate migration, add user ID to tweets. And we can do user ID equals integer. See what happens there. So if we open up that migration file in our DB folder, we should have that column on tweets with the user ID in place. So that's pretty much exactly what we're going for. So I'm going to go ahead and run that migration, and we'll type Rails DB migrate. Great. Now we still don't know how this is going to connect itself, but you could do this all with Rails console if you really wanted to. You could just run Rails C and open this console environment. Not sure what that's all about. Terminal type message mapper, something's up there. But if you were to get user equals user.connection and run user, we have all these things available to us now. At this point, there's just the ID that will relate to our comment. So if we were to do comment, or I'm sorry, tweet equals tweet, it'll do the same thing there. And we notice the new column here, user ID, which gets added after that migration. So Rails is smart enough to know that user ID probably means, hey, I want to get the ID to the user itself. So when we create a new record, it will sync those up and, you know, keep that relation intact. So it's kind of a quick gotcha there if you're not used to that lingo. So let's go ahead and go back to our controller. And there's a few things we want to do to make Devise work well with our app, and it uses these things. I could probably go to the repo to tell you better. These little helpers and filters that if it checks if the user signed in, you can check before something happens to authenticate user. I did that actually already. You saw me. You probably weren't sure what the hell I was talking about there, but this is what that means. Definitely read this landing page here. These things will come in handy. You'll use them a lot. You can get the current user if they're logged in. Make sure to check if they're logged in first. Same with these. So if you were, it's based on your model name. So I used user, but it's telling us here, if you scan quickly, if you were to change that model to member instead, you could call it this, and all that's dynamic. So kind of a quick overview there. So what we want to do is kind of configure our controller to work with Devise, and to do so, there's a few things we need to do on a few of these views or actions. So for tweet, for instance, for the new action, we need to get the current user and then grab the tweets on that user and then hit build. So we used that in the last series, if you followed along, when we created a new user or a new comment on a blog post. That's kind of what's going on here, but it's on the action itself. The same thing is true for the create method. We'll kind of mock what we just did. And I already messed up. These need to be 3's. Make sure you do that if you're following exactly along with me. Okay, and I believe that might be all we need. I added this before, the authenticate user. That's basically saying on the creation of a new tweet or edit of the tweet, deletion of a tweet, all those things need to be authenticated first. So with Devise, you can actually do that before the user is logged in. Make sure they're logged in to do those things. You can also check if they're logged in first, so you don't display certain things on the front end. And that's what we're gonna get into next. But before we do, I want to make sure I can create a successful tweet and it's connected to my account. So the best way to do that is to sign up for an account. And I'm gonna go ahead and do that and show you what is happening here. Make sure this works. We'll do web crunch. I can't type my own password in here. Okay, this should work. Got it. Okay, and to double check that without messing with the UI much, we can go back into Rails console. If I could type, it's going to give you that. Okay, Rails C. And I can go into the user model. I'm going to give it a variable here. Just grab the user.connection. Don't know really why we need to do that, but okay. user dot, let's say last. Can't spell, guys. Great. So it shows one record, and unfortunately my name and username are set to nil, so that's no good. Looks like something didn't happen that should have. All right, guys, I figured out what I did wrong here. One step of the process, and it's a blog post I'm going to share with you as well, that we need to route our new user sign up in such a way that goes to our actual registrations controller we created before. Right now, Devise doesn't know about this, and to tell it about it, we need to go to our routes file and configure that to know about it. So on our Devise 4, we need to actually comma separate and tell Devise to use this controller to override the default one instead. So we'll do the Rails with the arrow here, and we'll do registrations. Since we called it registrations controller, we'll call it registrations here too. Okay, so that's a big gotcha I forgot to tell you guys. So make sure you do that. If you don't, when you create a new user role, it will be nil like it was when you saw. So I'm gonna actually hook into this user and destroy it. Let's start from scratch. Oh, I didn't assign the user. I'm sorry. So user equals user.last. So now user is going to spit back me. I don't want, we go to user.destroy, and it deleted it, and we should be good. So if I go user equals user and user.all, should be empty array. Great. So we can exit this, delete that. I'm going to sign up again. Go users, sign up. And WebCrunch, I believe it was. Okay, account created. Let's again go into our console. And then at user, we'll get user, the user model, user.all. So we show the user ID. It created my name and username this time. So good, it worked. So don't forget that detail. It's a big one. If you don't update your routes to use that new registrations controller, it's kind of rendered useless. So that's kind of a gotcha. But again, I'll link to an article that explains this. It's very, very straightforward. It's a little dated. It's from 2014 actually, but it helped me tremendously. So great. So now we have these tweets. I'm going to go ahead and delete these since they aren't tied to an account. I don't want to get any crazy errors just because of it. So now our tweets, let's test if those tie to an account. This is a user generated tweet. So we got that. Go back to our controller. Something's not quite right here. It's telling me that's what's wrong in the error. It's did you mean tweets? Current user. All right, guys, I was finally able to get a tweet created with the user account. What was completely wrong and what took me forever to figure out was in my user model, I put tweets with 2 E's instead of 3. So if you're following along, you might be having these pains as well as me. So name this stuff you can remember and always come back to. Tweet. I'm so used to typing tweet from using Twitter pretty often that you forget that 30 because it's just not an actual word. So needless to say, once you create or update this, you probably won't have to worry about it, because in my demo app I'm using, I think, probably the real word. I'm not sure. You can actually create a record and it's tied to my account. This is still showing our static username of what I did, but what I can show you is that if I go into Rails console again, we can go to user, or let's see, at tweet with 3 E's equals tweet, tweet.connection, clear that at tweet dot all. Okay, at tweet equals tweet. That's because I'd spelt it wrong again. At tweet dot all, there is a tweet with the test tweet. It has a user ID of 2, which, if I recall correctly, is my user ID. So if I go to at user equals user, we'll get the user model. But then if I went to user.last, I don't think that works. No. Okay. Let's back out of this. It did show my ID, so that's promising. And I'm going to go back into our views and finally kind of plug this all together. So at this point, our controller is set up to work. It's routing right. We have the right routes in place. Our models are relating the way they should because I spelled things right this time. So now we can update our views to match everything.